mało mamy sprawdzonych informacji,
While we still have very little verified information about what's happening militarily in the Kursk region and its territories invaded by Ukrainian forces, the Russian propaganda is still playing its information game in an attempt to downplay these events. Above all, the aim is to reassure the Russian public and give the impression that nothing serious is happening. But is that really the case? What are the reactions of Russian society to what's happening? We'll look at materials and information on what's going on to explain how Russians are reacting to the Ukrainian incursion into Russia. They're murderers. They're Nazis. They're murderers. They're executioners. They're Poles, Polish mercenaries. So we were told by a soldier who told us to leave our village.
przede wszystkim wiemy już,
First of all, we already know what particular Russian accounts confirm, what has also been said here in Russian propaganda, that Russian society is in a state of panic. People are leaving the territories affected by the Ukrainian attack in panic and complaining that the authorities are not helping them, that they have been left without any support, and even that the propaganda is lying to them, reassuring them that everything is okay, while in fact, it's not okay at all. There are lessons to be learned from such events. I think some of these lessons are surprising to the Ukrainians themselves. They thought they would so panic, that people would be upset, and they were right.
jednocześnie, równolegle z
At the same time, in parallel with the propaganda game, in the state media, Russian institutions are trying to tighten censorship and ensure that information unfavorable to the authorities of the invaded areas does not reach the public sphere. Among other things, with this intention, Russian regulator Roskomnadzor on August 8th issued a decision to completely block YouTube in Russia. And on August 9th, it turned out that a very popular messaging service in Russia, regarded as one of the safest, Signal, is also being blocked. This is how the authorities are trying to ensure that information from the areas attacked by Ukrainians and affected by social panic does not reach wide audiences and spread throughout social networks. People who managed to escape and evacuate from the attacked areas complain that they have lost communication with relatives who stayed behind. This may indicate that the Russian authorities are also deliberately blocking satellite and telephone communication in order to, again, limit the spread of negative information. From particular information of Russians who fled the attacked areas, from information on social networks, as well as from reports gathered by the opposition media, and even some from Telegram channels, which are the social networks of correspondents and people who report on a regular basis and are not necessarily critical of the authorities, we know that the situation in the region, from a social perspective, does indeed not look very good. Russians primarily complain that they have been left without help. Here, the propaganda has a very difficult task because it has to level all these dangerous moods and somehow try to drive the narrative in such a way that it's reassuring to the public. Nevertheless, it's a very difficult matter because it's an extremely uncomfortable topic for the propaganda. They had to save themselves. These creatures from the administration are lying. They give themselves medals while people escape with their lives only because they saved themselves. Save yourself while you can. Television is just lies, 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 and more lies.
Z zebranych relacji wiemy,
From these collected accounts, we know that Russians did not in any way spontaneously or at the grassroots level fight against the invaders. There's no information about Russians in any way organizing themselves and taking up arms against the enemy. There's also no information about them organizing territorial defense, about increased enlistings in the attacked regions or in any other part of Russia. We see here that social, grassroots resistance to the Ukrainian attack in Russia is non-existent at this point. The most common strategy taken by Russians is to simply flee. Russians report that they have mostly evacuated themselves from dangerous areas, either using their own cars or some means of transportation, or with the help of their neighbors. At the same time, they complain that the authorities did not provide evacuation facilities for anyone willing to leave, which indicates, on the one hand, that authorities were simply not prepared for the fact that an evacuation would be needed, and on the other hand, it demonstrates organizational paralysis at the regional level and shows that the authorities are simply not prepared to act in such an organized, systemic way in critical situations.
7 числа
Our neighbors and friends helped with the escape. There was no evacuation, and there still isn't. My parents are from Martynovka. Neighbors, whoever could, left, but of course with their own cars. Those who don't have cars are still in Martynovka and Pushkarne. No one is evacuating them. In the city itself, many people went missing without any news, and they are being searched for because there is neither communication nor electricity. There is no communication with people. What our governors write, that they are evacuating people by buses, this is not true. Everyone is leaving on their own and under fire. Yesterday, I was in the Bolsha-Slodak region, which is still fairly okay. This is the only place where you could buy food and water, because here no one provides supplies, or water, or anything else. People are cut off from the world. They have nothing. Yesterday, the soldiers said that Martynovka is no longer ours. Martynovka has already been occupied by the Hohols, the Ukrainians. My children are in Kursk. I had to leave everything, even though they are under fire there. We also don't know what the situation is. We don't know because they are constantly lying to us. They say it's calm, that everything is fine. But if soldiers came yesterday and said that there are already Ukrainians in Martynovka, while the authorities say that everything is fine, then nothing is fine.
W sieciach społecznościowych pojawiają się również
There are also complaints and grievances on social networks that local authorities did not care about their own residents and do not provide them with proper assistance. There are also accusations against the propaganda. It's said outright that the propaganda is lying and misrepresents the situation by reassuring the Russians that everything is fine, while in fact in the lands occupied by the Ukrainians or in the attacked territories, it's still dangerous and residents have to flee. It's also worth mentioning that in this critical situation, a well-known Russian attitude emerges, meaning that people turn directly to Putin for help. In an authoritarian state such as Russia, this is a very common method of trying to solve problems when basic, systemic methods of solving social-political problems are not working. The public appeals to Putin as the highest authority, asking for help and complaining about the bad regional authorities. This is such a popular paradigm. The good Tsar helps society, and the bad boyars, behind his back, make decisions that are unfavorable to society. We see here that in this situation, a situation of attack where society feels threatened, Russians still believe that this appeal could help them. These are just some statements proving that this belief is still alive and well, that Putin can solve all of people's problems. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, we, the people of the Russian Federation from the Kursk Oblast, the Sudzansk region, address you on August 6th. Foreign troops with NATO equipment entered our land. Within hours, our city was turned to ruins. Our husbands, our neighbors are defending Donbass. We lost our land. We lost our homes. We fled under fire. We ran among the ruins. Many of us have no documents. We turn to you for help. We have been left alone. We have lived through shelling. We supported and are supporting our army from the very first days, from the very beginning of the special military operation. Please, someone say something more. We were left with our children without shelter, without water, without money. We had to escape with what we had. Our children are afraid to sleep at night. Our relatives stayed behind. We cannot contact them. There is no communication. Please help us.
Co rzuca się w oczy po wysłuchaniu tych wypowiedzi, to to,
What is striking after listening to these statements is that they are completely devoid of any deeper reflection on what the real causes of the Ukrainian attack on Russian territory are. There is no mention of the criminal war that Putin unleashed, nor of the fact that Putin is actually pursuing policies that are destroying Russia and are very harmful to Russian society. At this stage, we don't see among the voices out of Russia any deeper reflection, a reevaluation of how the regime is perceived and how Putin and the war itself are perceived. Instead, the dissatisfaction and frustration of citizens are clearly visible, and the question is, how will they evolve in the next few days and what they will transform into? There will probably be some chaos and frustration and bitterness and perhaps paralysis of some social and political life in the area. On the other hand, I don't expect any larger organized disruption to evolve out of this, like protests against the regime. Therefore, we can say that at this point, of course, the events in the Kursk region and other border regions are not favorable to the Kremlin in terms of image, but in the political sphere, at this point at least, they are not a significant threat to the Kremlin. Putin, Putin, please help. Putin, Putin, please help. Please help. They are bombing villages. Surely you don't know what's going on. It's terrible what's happening here.
Wśród reakcji społecznych widać przede wszystkim, że to...
Among the public reactions, the anti-Ukrainian sentiment is center stage. There is a huge anger against Ukrainians in the statements of Russians, who call them chochols, Nazis, Ukronazis, and so on. And also an anger against the West. We also see that the propaganda has evolved in recent days towards blaming the West and that it coordinated these Ukrainian attacks. In contrast, there is no major threat against the West as to what Russia might do in response. So we'll continue to monitor both the public sentiment and propaganda to see where it goes. In the propaganda, there was, however, a theme of looking for internal enemies. That is, people who are responsible for the fact that the Russian border was not protected, that hostile troops invaded the country, that citizens were not evacuated in time, and that they were not given adequate assistance. We see that the propaganda is trying to redirect public anger and hostility towards internal enemies. War correspondents or commentators on Russian television who have been nominated as these enemies, who, as indicated in the propaganda, sow panic and make Russian society hysterical. The authorities in Kyiv make no secret of the fact that their goal is to destabilize the political situation in our country. Therefore, when I say coordinated actions, I mean those who are sowing panic, spreading blatant nonsense, and, to use the language of Comrade Stalin, are alarmists and traitors. This information chaos that has been unleashed by Ukrainian PSYOP channels, not just on Telegram but also in other mass media, is absolutely unprecedented and raises the question: have you all gone mad? Are you working for the enemy? Do you even understand what weight your words carry? Do you understand the hysteria? Tonight you came up with the idea of a deep, 10-kilometer-long tank breach on the broad front line. Where do you get such information? Do you understand how the people of the Kursk governorate will react to this? The consequences of the panic? Do you even realize your responsibility for the lies you spread? And then some of you, even those in uniform running channels on Telegram, a separate issue altogether, start saying, well, after all, wasn't there a diversionary reconnaissance group?
Nastroje niezadowolenia, rozgoryczenia czy chaosu.
The Kremlin might use this mood of discontent, bitterness, and chaos, as well as this anti-Ukrainian or anti-Western sentiment, in the next few days or months to make some war-related decisions that have so far been unpopular in Russian society. Perhaps it will intensify mobilization, which is still being carried out in Russia, only at a slightly lower rate than at the beginning of the partial mobilization, coordinated in Russia in September 2022. It remains to be seen how this will unfold, because so far the mobilization decision has been seen as a socially unfavorable one, as one that provoked discontent and therefore carried additional political risks for the Kremlin. In the broader scheme of things, we can also see that the incursion of Ukrainians into Russian territory undermines the ideological underpinnings of the Kremlin regime, which preaches the conservative ideology associated with the Ruski Mir, the so-called Russian world. In light of the Kremlin's rhetoric, Ukraine is part of this Russian world, a rebellious part, a part manipulated by the West, but a part nonetheless. And it's beyond the comprehension of very many Russians that Ukrainians could spontaneously invade Russian territory and fight Russians on Russian soil. We can see that Ukrainian actions have led to the undermining of this ideology, and we'll see how the Kremlin handles this in the weeks and months to come. In light of the Ukrainian attack on Russia, the whole narrative about the Russian world, or this so-called triune Russian nation, is slowly being eroded. We have to say that the actions of the Ukrainians, their incursion into Russian territory, have caused a great deal of political image problems for the Kremlin. First of all, they demonstrated that the Russian state is unable to defend its border, to ensure the security of its citizens, to systemically organize aid and evacuation. These are facts that pierce the image of the authorities and the image of the Kremlin and undermine the credibility of the propaganda. And we'll see how the propaganda and the Kremlin authorities deal with this in the days to come. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to follow more of our coverage from the region.